Hello YouTube and welcome back to another day with the hero's downfall. As always, I appreciate everyone taking the time to come out and watch this video. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe with notifications on, and if you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like or a comment. It does help the channel out quite a bit. So you've played Magic the Gathering before, but haven't played Commander? This video will show you exactly what you need for your first Commander deck, with a full deck list and the overall price. The link will be in the description below. So let's take a look at our commander, Azami, Lady of the Scrolls. For 3 blue and 2 colorless, you get a 0/2 human wizard with the ability tap an untapped wizard you control, draw a card. What's truly powerful about this is that it gets around summoning sickness. So when Azami or any other wizard you control hits the field, you can simply go ahead and tap them to draw a card. And as we do have nearly 30 wizards in the deck, this is an overwhelming ability. To kick it off with some of our powerful creatures, we have Lighthouse Chronologist. At face value, he is 1 blue and 1 generic for a 1/3 human wizard, just meaning that as soon as he hits the field, you can go ahead and immediately tap him to replace him in your hand and draw a card. But looking even further, he does have a unique level up ability, which if you're unfamiliar, is done at sorcery speed. For his level up, it is 1 blue. After you get him to level 7, he becomes a 3/5 human wizard, which is fine, but where he really shines is this ability which reads, at the beginning of each end step, if it's not your turn, take an extra turn after this one. This can be incredibly oppressive and in some cases game ending for your opponents if you can successfully pull it off and defend him, which in this deck is very easy to do. Now, as I said before, most all of the creatures in this deck are of the class Wizard, meaning that the Stony Brook allowing those cards to be cast for 1 colorless less goes a very long way. I know just 1 colorless mana doesn't seem like a lot, but trust me, when you're stacking up your hand from all the cards you're drawing, this does really give you an advantage, and in many cases can allow you to just play out your hand in 1 turn. Now, this might be my favorite uncommon creature in the entire deck, I'm not sure. But the Graceful Adept does have the ability of you have no maximum hand size, which, as I've said before, this deck is going to draw an absurd amount of cards with all the wizards that you're going to have on the field. So not having to discard your end step is extremely satisfying to just each turn draw 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on cards each turn, and just watching your hand fill up with resources is incredibly satisfying. Next up, we have Laboratory Maniac. 2 generic and 1 blue gets you a 2/2 human wizard. That's really all there is to mention about this card, not an awful lot. I'm just kidding. If you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game. If I haven't already said it, let me say it again. This deck will draw you an absurd amount of cards. Your hands will be silly with how many cards you're drawing. So it is very doable to just simply draw out your entire deck very rapidly. Next up, we have Riptide Director. Riptide Director takes the theme of this deck and really rubs it into your opponent's face. Like, brush your teeth and have a glass of orange juice. This card really drives the point home. It is 2 generic and 2 blue for a 2/3 wizard. You can pay 2 generic and 2 blue and tap this card to draw a card for each wizard you control. So you could theoretically have, say, 10 wizards on the board, tap 9 of them to draw 9 cards, and then pay Riptide Director's ability cost, tap it, and then draw an additional 10 cards. So that would be theoretically 19 cards in 1 turn for just 4 mana. And here we have an absolute force to be reckoned with in Galecaster Colossus. Galecaster Colossus does have one of the highest converted mana costs in the entire deck. At 5 generic and 2 blue, you get a 5/6 giant wizard. So this card, just like any other wizard in the deck, can be tapped to draw a card, but more importantly, it has a ability very similar to that of Azami herself, which is tap an untapped wizard you control. Return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. So Galecaster outsources its ability to itself and all other wizards you have in the deck. So you could, with Azami and Galecaster Colossus on the board, either tap a wizard you control to draw a card, or tap a wizard you control to bounce any permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. So you can do this in response to somebody attacking you, or just getting rid of say an enchantment that you don't have the ability to currently deal with, or something like that, or deny your opponent some type of resource. Or you could just single target focus at somebody and bounce their entire board, or at least a decent chunk of it if you wanted to. This card is an absolute force to be reckoned with. Next up, we have Reality Shift. 1 generic, 1 blue, instant speed. Exile target creature. Its controller manifests the top card of his or her library. So the reason I really want to focus on this card is because, one, exiling is often better than destroying. Let's say you were to destroy a card in a Reanimator deck, or just any deck that has black, or maybe access to Eternal Witness, something like that. They would theoretically be able to have the potential to get that card back. But with Reality Shift, often exiling a card is much more permanent. There's very few ways to return a card from exile. Now, your opponent does get a 2/2 blocker in the form of a manifested card from the top of their library. I do also think that's very beneficial because you are pseudo-denying them the next card they would have drawn, which does have the possibility to be a card that they would have very much benefited from. But it does also run the risk of exiling a card they wouldn't have used, like a land or something, and then having the next card be useful, but often just denying them a card that they needed and they already paid mana for and spent time on their turn casting is much, much more beneficial. And now on to what is quite possibly my favorite targeted removal in all of Magic the Gathering, Capsize. 2 blue and 1 generic at instant speed, return target permanent to its owner's hand. Capsize also has a buyback ability that you can pay 3 additional generic, so 4 generic and 2 blue, to bounce any permanent to its owner's hand. Now, specifically in Commander, as it is a singleton format, each card that you have in the deck, you want to get as much value and as much versatility out of it as possible, since there is only one of it. So with Capsize, you could bounce a threatening card that your opponent has to their hand, much like Galecaster Colossus. You can hit an artifact that they need, you can hit an enchantment that you don't have the ability to interact with, you can hit a creature that's about to attack you. You can also save your permanents. So if you've cast Azami theoretically 5 times and the commander tax is getting too high and someone's about to destroy her, you could just bounce her back to your hand and then pay Capsize's buyback ability and still retain Capsize, so you can utilize it over and over again. Capsize is one of my favorite cards in the entire deck. Now, we run what is referred to as reactive board wipes. Polymorphic Suggest is only 2 blue and 1 generic at instant speed. Until end of turn, each creature target player controls loses all abilities and becomes a blue frog with base power and toughness 1/1. So if an opponent attacks you, you can in response turn their creatures into 1/1s, let them smash into your wizards, and theoretically destroy most, if not all, of those creatures. You can also minimize the amount of damage you would take, or use this in response to a creature with abilities that you can't necessarily deal with, as it does also just simply nullify those abilities for this turn. This also sends a great message to your opponents to make them think twice about attacking you. Aether Spouts is 3 generic and 2 blue instant speed. For each attacking creature, its owner puts it on the top or bottom of his or her library. So an opponent decides to swing into you with all of their big scary creatures thinking that they're about to knock you out of the game. And in response, you go ahead and bounce all of those creatures to the top of their library. So for the next few turns, instead of drawing cards they would actually need, they're just simply drawing and attempting to recast creatures they had otherwise already drawn and spent time and mana on. You could also put them on the bottom of their library and ensure the likelihood that you're probably going to never see them again. Now, as I've shown, this deck is very mana efficient, but we do run an array of mana rocks and ramp. First and foremost is Soul Ring, and auto-include in any commander deck, but we do also have Mind Stone at only 2 generic. It does tap for 1 generic, but you can also pay 1 generic, tap it, sacrifice it, and draw a card. Sky Diamond is also only 2 generic, It does enter tapped, and it does tap for 1 blue mana, which does help keep you above the curve. In Commander Sphere, which is another almost auto-include in any commander deck, it does cost 3 generic to play, and it does tap for 1 color of any color in your commander's color identity, which in this case is just blue, but you can also sacrifice it to draw a card. And Sapphire Medallion. This card will really carry you the extra distance in this deck. It is only 2 generic to play and simply reads, blue spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So that's all your blue creatures, enchantments, instants, sorceries, etc. This card really goes the distance. Next up, another major winner we have in this deck is Venser's Journal. This card is 5 generic to play and says you have no maximum hand size. At the beginning of your upkeep, you gain 1 life for each card in your hand, and as you will be drawing an absolute ludicrous amount of cards, you can skyrocket your life total very, very quickly, and also ensure that you do not have to discard from all the extra cards you will inevitably be drawing. And another major team player we have with drawing cards is Spellbook. In the theme of wizards, this does cost 0 to play and simply reads you have no maximum hand size to really seal the deal of all those cards you will be drawing. Now, the only enchantment I feel the need to mention is also one of my favorites. Archmage Ascension is just 2 generic and 1 blue. This enchantment reads, at the beginning of each end step, if you drew 2 or more cards this turn, you may put a quest counter on Archmage Ascension. As long as Archmage Ascension has 6 or more quest counters on it, if you would draw a card, you may instead search your library for a card, put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. After this has 6 quest counters on it, it is essentially an auto tutor. Now, the way I like to run it is as this. At the end of your turn, you would have obviously drawn at least 2 cards, so you would have gotten a quest counter on it. Save your creatures, don't tap them all at once, so that when it comes to your next opponent's turn, you would tap 2 creatures in response to whatever. At the end of their turn, get a quest counter, and repeat the process. You will very quickly get up to those 6 quest counters, and then once you do, you can start tapping your wizards to simply tutor for whatever cards you need, like key combos or any needed instant sorcery cards. This is one of the absolute best cards in this deck. Now, this deck does have plenty of combo potential. One of the absolute most lethal ones I want to take a moment to mention, as it can be pretty confusing, is with Creature to Fairy and Knowledge Pool. Essentially, with both permanents in play, opponents can no longer cast spells. Let me take a minute to really explain that, as it can be confusing. Knowledge Pool normally ignores timing restrictions, allowing players to cast any spell it has exiled. However, Teferi adds a restriction the pool does not ignore. There is a relevant Oracle text ruling on Knowledge Pool. Quote, timing restrictions based on the card's type are ignored. For example, you can cast an exiled creature card this way. Other restrictions, such as Spinal Embraces, cast Spinal Embraces only during combat, are not ignored. End quote. As the trigger from the pool will always be on the stack while it resolves, and it will always be put onto the stack when an opponent casts a spell. Opponents will never be able to cast anything because of the sorcery speed restriction requiring the stack be empty. So effectively what you can do is you can play Creature to Fairy and then play Knowledge Pool, and your opponents will no longer be able to cast any spells for the remainder of those cards being on the field. They will be able to use any cards that they have on the field, so be sure to make sure there's no cards on the field that you can't deal with. Playing Creature to Fairy and Knowledge Pool is effectively ending the game for your opponents and opening up the game for you to win. I normally cast these cards when I see a win in sight, and I just want to seal the deal and make sure nobody gets in the way of my endgame. And the last combo I want to mention is that of Spell Crumple and Tunnel Vision. Spell Crumple is 2 blue and 1 generic for an instant counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, put it on the bottom of its owner's library instead of into that player's graveyard. Put Spell Crumple on the bottom of its owner's library. Tunnel Vision is a sorcery of 5 generic and 1 blue. Name a card. Target player reveals cards from the top of his or her library until the named card is revealed. If it is, that player puts the rest of the revealed cards into his or her graveyard and puts the named card on top of his or her library. Otherwise, the player shuffles his or her library. Effectively, you can just mill somebody down to one card, or you can do it to yourself and capitalize off of a card like Laboratory Maniac and open yourself up to win, or critically cripple an opponent. Spell Crumple and Tunnel Vision is a very effective combo, and I highly recommend it.